Welcome to Bold Voices, Good Yarns. I'm your host, Ian Hensel. Join me on an interactive journey as we step between the pages to learn how an author's life and their experiences have shaped the stories that we love. So, grab a cup of joe or a cocktail and join me as we talk to today's guest. We're here today with Samantha Ryan, who is an author, and she's the author of the book, if I have it right over here, Pride, which is
Hey.
coming out in time for Valentine's Day. So grab your favorite cup of joe, a cocktail, get comfy as we jump and dive between the pages to learn more about Samantha. So you prefer to be called Sam, right?
I go by Sam. Yeah, I write under Samantha, but I like Sam. It's quick and
Okay.
easy.
All right. So Sam, let's jump right in. Can you share a bit about your upbringing and how that impacted your worldview?
Yeah. So we were kind of joking about this earlier. I feel like asking a queer person about their upbringing is like asking a woman her age. Like this can be a really dangerous question. I'm from Oklahoma. So I was raised very religious. Baptist is the flavor. So yeah, I feel like that definitely kind of influenced the way that I saw the world as a child. And then growing up, it was really not until college that I feel like I kind of expanded my worldview a little bit by hearing other voices and getting to read other voices, honestly, was a big part of that.
So, growing up in that religious environment, did that dictate the types of books you read growing up?
Yes and no. I feel like my parents were encouraged us to be readers from a very young age. So, I was reading by the time I was 5, and we would take family trips to the library. So every Saturday we'd go and we'd have like a limit of like, you can get this many books. So there was never any discouragement from reading, clearly. But I do think that the kinds of things I was seeking, I don't feel really changed until in high school. My senior year, I read William Faulkner. And that I think changed everything. That is what immediately made me want to be a writer and changed my worldview of what words could be.
How did Faulkner impact you? I mean, what was it about Faulkner?
So the book was As I Lay Dying, which is my favorite book. And I think it was just like even on the page, the way he uses words on the page, there's one chapter where he arranges them so that the shape that's missing is the coffin that Addie Bundren is in the book. And so even just like seeing that a writer could use words to create an image that the reader is seeing as they're going through, I'd never seen that before. And that was something that really struck me as like not only as a writer writing because you're reading the words as you take them in, but how you're physically laying them out on the page impacts what you're reading. And that was the first time I'd seen that. And that really just kind of blew my mind.
You said something really interesting, how the words are laid out on the page. What do you mean by that?
So like the coffin example, like the word stop so that the empty space is the shape of the coffin in As I Lay Dying, which I had never seen. And so from there, I kind of got into like E. Cummings and the poetry that kind of does the same thing where the page itself is the canvas for a writer to not only have the layered meaning for what they're saying, but also how they're shaping those words and how that shape potentially influences how the reader takes that. I find that a really, really interesting concept for a writer.
So the words and the visual, and
Yeah,
using the
like,
words to create a visual.
yeah, almost as though your page is a canvas. Like the placement to me matters as much as what you're actually saying. I think that is kind of an interesting way to look at it.
Did you have that in mind when you were writing Pride?
Not so much pride because I feel like it's first person and it's very internal to Ben's head and his thoughts. So I feel like to me, I viewed it almost as more of like diary entries of what he's thinking and seeing. But I do have another book that I've been working on that is specifically more about how the placement of those words would look once it's printed. So I think that is something that I'm conscious of when I'm writing. Not so much in Pride, I think, because of the way the stream of consciousness is for Ben. I think that was more my focus than what it would look like on the page.
Do you think that there's a big difference between the printed page and an ebook? And an ebook doesn't give you the same creativity if you have flowable text, which is
Yeah.
what most readers like, the author loses that creativity of layout. You have some layout options, but not as much. What do you think of that?
I think it's interesting. I think, and the same with audiobooks too, because I feel like with audio, you're losing the ability to see it. I know some people listen to audiobooks while they follow along with the printed book, but I think just with new mediums, it's just a new way for authors to think of how then those things are used. So it may not be the same as a printed page, but now you have new opportunities also. So like with audio, you can do different characters and you can really make it more artistic in that way. So I think each medium has its advantages. And so I feel like as authors, we have to just be really conscious, I think, of which medium has which advantage over the others.
Now, growing up in that Baptist environment, and then when you went away to school, when you went to university, you realized that you were queer or started to
Not so
explore.
much.
No, okay.
It's even later than that, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah.
What were the influences that caused you to start exploring that?
um, I think, I mean, well, a lot of it, I think, was therapy. I think just growing up, I don't know, there was a lot of me now, I think that looking back realizes that I just never took the time to figure out who I was as a person in general. So I think part of that understanding identity as a whole unlocked all of those avenues to understanding my own sexuality, which happened way, way later than it probably should have for a lot of reasons. But I think that's why a lot of my work I focuses on like coming out later stories, because I feel like not everybody has those really early realizations, which I don't know if that sounds unrealistic to someone maybe who isn't from that perspective, but I think especially when your worldview is very narrow, you don't even see what's outside of your lane that you're in. So I think that was a lot of my experience as a young adult. It's just the path was so specific that it wasn't even anything that I was conscious of.
It Well, it's interesting that for your first published novel, you've chosen kind of a queer spin on Pride and Prejudice, and the characters are male, and it's a romance, and it's basically an M to M romance, as the jargon goes. Why did you select that as your, rather than going down a sapphic romance, as they say,
Yeah.
path?
Yeah. I think so. I'm currently writing a lesbian love story. I think part of it is in the beginning when I first was writing the story, it was too connected to me. I think I was putting too much of my own point of view, or if that makes sense, like making the characters myself. I think the MM genre allows me to step out of it a little bit, if that makes sense, to view it more objectively. And I think that like one of my first jumps into fiction was fan fiction. So I think in fan fiction gives women, especially like myself, who did not come from this queer space, the safety, I think, to kind of explore that without it being too attached to themselves in a lot of ways. So I think I was seeing those relationships and identifying with them without realizing how I was identifying with them, if that makes sense. And then once I was able to try to kind of explore that on my own, it started to all make sense of like, oh yeah, obviously that clicks for you.
I've heard a few things. I've heard, that it allowed an objectivity
Yeah.
because you were distanced. It also sounds like, as I say, you were shooting all over yourself,
Yeah.
which I think we do. I think
Yeah.
you're not immune. I think lots of people should all over themselves.
Yeah.
I should do this. I should do that. For those listeners who are not understanding that I'm saying should and not another word. So tell me, are there any aspects of your life that you think readers might be surprised to learn influenced your writing?
Surprised? Probably not. I mean, I think I worry a lot about just because of me, I feel like I consider myself young in my own identity journey. So I worry a lot about maybe people who have had the freedom to grow up more in that way, maybe not seeing my perspective, if that makes sense. I worry a lot about, like I said, about like the coming to it later in life. It just brings so many different, not challenges, but I think unique points of view for someone who comes out later in life. there's a group on Reddit that I follow that's late bloomer lesbians, and it's women who have found themselves much later than a lot of other people who are figuring out their identity later. And so I think that I worry about how that comes across maybe sometimes, but I mean, who doesn't think about that part of it?
Well, we all have our life experiences, and, it's hard to pick and choose, and some good experiences, some not so good. But as a whole, they all influence us. If you could go back in time and have a conversation with your younger self at the start of your journey, what would you say?
We talk a lot about that in therapy. I think, honestly, if I don't know that I would want to change the journey that I've had for a lot of reasons. I think that learning the lessons I've learned as I've learned them have been important to me. So, but I do think I wish I could go back and tell that 5-year-old reader just to be kinder to themselves. I feel like a lot of times, especially for people who are creative, we get so in our heads. And with writers, you're really isolated. Writing is such a isolating creative endeavor. I know once you get to the publication side, you've got editors and all of that where you have more people involved. But from the creation to getting it on the page, that part you're just by yourself in a lot of ways. So I would just encourage writers and creatives to not be so hard on themselves and then also not allow themselves to be so isolated.
Do you think if your life were a videotape and you could rewind it to a specific point and have it go a different way, is there a point you'd rewind videotape? I'm showing my age. Rewind the film. Is there a point you'd go back and do something differently?
I mean, probably. I think everybody has those, like, I wish I would have, the branching out moments where you wish you could have done things differently. I think, again, like I said, because I consider my path to a certain point felt very narrow. Looking back, I can see how narrow that was. And I do feel like I have a lot of regrets on that. I think now I've obviously opened myself up to more just in general, but I wish when I was younger, I would have not been so narrow in where I was going and what I was doing. But a lot of that, I mean, like, again, with religion, there's a lot of conditioning that's the goal, right? Is to not question and to not go beyond outside of your own boundaries. So I do wish, I could probably do that differently. I think it would have made my life a lot easier, obviously.
Well, and having read Pride, there is an aspect of you I can see in the characters.
Yeah.
There's Ben who runs the bookshop, and he's out there and kind of very free and proud. And then the other character, what is his name?
Avery is a closeted writer.
Avery's a closeted writer. He's
Yeah.
very constricted. So do you think you were working out those aspects of yourself through Avery
I'm
and
sure
Ben?
my therapist, if she reads Pride, I'm sure she will probably identify several of those key moments. But yeah, I think in general, I identify more with Avery in a lot of ways, just obviously because of this knowing. I think so much about Avery is that he knows what he needs to do to get where he wants to be. And it's just knowing that by doing that, you're then dismantling everything that you kind of had up to that point. And for a lot of queer people, that moment, if it's able to come when you're younger, you don't have a lot of that unraveling to do. But the longer you go, the more the foundation, the buildings, and all of that that's built up and up and up, you have to take a lot of that apart piece by piece. And so that's why I feel like that's kind of unique to a late bloomer mindset. And like so much of what you've already built, you're then unwinding. And I feel like there's a lot of explaining you feel like you have to do to people around you. And so I think, I hope that all of those things that Avery worries about, which are things that I feel like I've personally kind of gone through, come across in a genuine way of like why he feels the way he feels and how he has to take apart so much of his life to get what he wants out of it.
I think they do. So I want to do a pivot, and it's something I ask everyone we interview, and that is, if you could live in a book, so what book would you want to live in? And my caveat is always, you may really like The Pit and the Pendulum as a story, but who wants to live there?
Yeah. Yeah. I just finished Somewhere Beyond the Sea, which is the sequel to House of the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. And I love that world. The world he's created is so great. it's not so different from our world, but there's a lot of magic in it, and it's done in such a kind way. Like, I think the way he writes, he hopes for the best in people. And so I think, I don't know, I'd want to live in that world. But specifically, if I could be the Phoenix like Arthur, I think that would be my top. Yeah, is that I would want to be a Phoenix.
I'm not familiar with the work, but
Great, highly recommend. It's a
it
great
is.
story.
I am I hearing that there's also like a sense of freedom in there as well?
Maybe, yeah, quite
That's
possibly.
that's interesting. Well, once again, I want to thank you for being on Bold Voices, Good Yarns. We've been talking to Samantha Ryan. Her new book
Yeah.
is Pride, which is a queer spin on Pride and Prejudice, and it's coming out for Valentine's Day. So you can find that through all online and independent booksellers, and it's published by Rattling Good Yarns Press. So, Sam, thank you for being on our show today.
Yeah, this was fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye. You've been listening to Bold Voices, Good Yarns, brought to you by Rattling Good Yarns Press. Subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube, and follow us on social media. Search for Rattling Good Yarns Press. Also, visit our website at rattlinggoodyarns.com, where you can find great reads and interesting articles about the world of books. See you soon!